Well, it's been a busy news week, from the escalating hostilities in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo that has seen 14 South African soldiers killed, to former President Jacob Zuma's daughter, Duduzile Zuma Sambudla, appearing in court for charges relating to the 2021 July unrest. Now, in our weekly wrap, we are joined by Dr Kingsley Makhubela, who is a former diplomat and international relations expert. We also are joined by political analyst Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast. You're also welcome to be part of the conversation. Talk to us about, stories that really got you to sit up and listen in the past week. 072-110-5584 is our WhatsApp line. You're more than welcome to give us a call. Greatest concerns from the week that was in the news cycle, 010-594-6010. To be part of our conversation. Professor Breakfast and Dr. Makhubela, a good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. I think, Dr. Makhubela, I want to start with you because it's almost impossible to start this conversation without looking at just how excitable, and I think that might even be an understatement, this week certainly was where international relations is concerned, particularly our relations with Rwanda. At this point, we're talking about 14 lives lost from South Africa's end. And then there's the question around the reports that are being shared around close to 700 people that have been killed in the battle since it has begun to escalate in Goma. But I'm keen to hear some of the moments that really concerned you in the week that has passed, particularly around the quality of diplomacy between South Africa and Rwanda in the past 7 days. I think that's a great place for us to start.
Naledi, good evening. Thanks very much for the invitation. Naledi, one of the really thing that has been occupying a lot of people, and it was trending around different platforms, was this spat between President Kagame and President Ramaphosa. And I think that emerged because of two fundamental issues. And I'll explain my view on those issues. The issue that the Minister of Defense said President Ramaphosa has warned President Kagame. I think something was lost in the translation there. I don't think the minister intended to say that. It may have been a direct translation of wanting to convey to the media that the president has raised his concerns about what's going on there, but not warning. So I think something was lost in translation. And I don't think the president would really warn a foreign head of state that he's having very cordial relations with. That's one. Yeah. The second thing was the unfortunate part, Naledi, that in the president's statement, there was a reference to the Rwanda Defense Force as a militia. And I don't think, again, that was the real intention. I think people who were doing quality control, they failed to really write the sentence in a manner that explains militias that are there. And of course, the concern that maybe they wanted to raise about the Ugandan Defense Force, the Rwandese Defense Force. How should this, how could have this better handled? I think President Kagame chose a very wrong platform and used unfortunate description of his own colleague. What he should have done was to ask his ambassador here to seek clarity on those two issues. And I think they would have been clarified. The tension would have been managed. Because the two of them, at the end of the day, they'll need to go back to the drawing board and have this cordial relationship in order to really resolve this big problem in the Congo. That's one thing that has been occupying people's mind. And I think President Ramaphosa is quite correct not to respond over the social media. And I've said my view is that he should send a special envoy to go and raise concerns about what Rwanda, how President Kagame described him. It was unfortunate. I think conversation between heads of state, it's always kept very, very confidential. Even in the worst of times, it's kept confidential. It's not used for political purposes. It's not used for scoring points. It's better utilized. Yeah,
it's interesting because you talk about President Cyril Ramaphosa, Dr. Makhubela, being right not to respond to President Kagame on social media. And if you remember, though, that particular ex by President Kagame, in fact, responding to one that had come from the president. And I wonder if the right thing for us to have done as a country was to allow for SADC to lead the conversation here on what happens in the DRC, particularly because in this week, in conversations with the presidency, spokesperson, certainly for the presidency, really emphatically making the point that our troops are there under the deployment of SADC and not just to South Africa as a standalone country. And I wonder if that distinction is important in deciding who leads the conversation?
You know, at the end of the day, Naledi, if you send troops and they are killed in the battlefield, Ramaphosa has the responsibility as the president of this country to explain to the nation. And that's why my view has been that the president should have addressed the nation and explain what's going on and give assurance to the people. And also, that message would have served as a morale booster for the soldiers who are in harm's way. And it would have allowed the general public to rally behind the president and the troops, particularly during this trying time. It would have avoided question of writing things on the media. And I think had the president chosen to speak directly to the nation around these issues, it would have alleviated some of this misfortune that we found in the statement. Having said that, the president can't be the one who sits down and scrutinizes every letter. It's the work of the bureaucracy to do that. And I think they've let him down in terms of that. I'm sure, and that I'm certain about, there's no way he can describe the Rwandese Defense Force as a militia. Remember, this country trained helicopter pilots from Rwanda, and all of a sudden describe them as militias. I think that the word militia was wrongly used, and I don't think that was the intention of the president at all.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a political fallout here, Professor Breakfast, and I bring you in. I know your specialty being on political analysis. Here's the reality: we live in a very politically charged country. We also are under the 7th administration that is a government of national unity. South Africans look at so many things under the vise of what politics. What the political implications of some moves are. And what do you think the political discussion that is being sparked here in this conflict in the DRC certainly is for South Africa? I mean, I'm thinking about just the amount of information that is becoming available to us. At this point, we're talking about are our soldiers surrounded or held hostage in the DRC? And there seems to be different views on what that is. Are South Africans satisfied with the information being given to them, Prof?
Naledi, there is a strong nexus between security and development. My view is that there is no way the country can prosper economically. There is no way the government can promote development for all and sundry if it is surrounded by parts of the continent which are collapsing. No wonder I think our military has been deployed to the DRC and other parts of the continent to bring a stability. But I think our leaders, the politicians in particular, have been the ones that have been letting down the country. Why do I say that? Because one of the problems of the South African National Defense is budget cuts. That is not a decision that emanates from security officers. Those are decisions which are made by men and women out of uniform, not by men and women in uniform. So the government of the day needs to make up its mind whether it does want a defense force or not. You cannot treat the defense force like a light bulb whereby you think that you can switch it on and off. If we agree as a country, we want to have a defense force, then there must be enough resources which are allocated to the defense force. If I can do a quick comparative analysis, if you look at countries like the US, never mind the size of the economy, year in and year out, the budget of the armed forces in the US, it goes up. Because you cannot separate the economy from security. No wonder the country has been able to be hegemonic, in terms of the world order. In the same way, I know this is, a very controversial view, but South Africa has been trying to frame a discourse as a hegemonic force on the African continent. It has been trying to behave like a United States of Africa, by deploying its armed forces and so on. But in order for us to succeed in doing that, by using the military, whether through soft power or hard power, we need to make sure that we don't let down men and women in uniform by allocating insufficient resources to them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make there, Prof. Breakfast, and I want to bring it back to Dr. Makhubela because you and I have a lot more of the local politics to discuss, Prof. But Dr. Makhubela, Prof there talks about how South Africa's been operating, in his own words, as a sort of United States of Africa on the continent. And a lot of the debate this week has been, well, is our presence there really that of a peacekeeping mission? Certainly that is what the government is communicating. But there is also a sense that the line, so to speak, is starting to be drawn in the sand on who is fighting on which side in the DRC. Is that concerning for you? And does it require a more decisive sort of communication?
Now, let me just clarify something that the general who was being interviewed by Aldrin earlier today said about the Banyamulenge and the M23. The Banyamulenge problem, Naledi, is an old problem. It started during Mobutu Sese Seko time. It's a community that speaks Kinyarwanda. You find them both in the DRC and in Rwanda. And it's as a result of arbitrarily border demarcation that was done by colonial powers. So those are the people that have been left out. So during Mobutu time, he set up the Mai Mai really to obliterate this community because they never liked them. Kabila, both Laurent and Joseph Kabila, when they came to power, there was an understanding that they would integrate them into the society in the DRC. They didn't do that. The fact that they took individual, put them there, is not resolving the bigger picture of the community to allow them to exercise their right to participate in the vote, participate in anything in the country. So they have been left out in terms of that. That's why the M23 has found fertile ground in terms of recruiting people there. Having said that, with respect to your question, Naledi, and this is unfortunate. I mean, if you look at the SADC documents for the establishment of the SADC mission to the DRC, it makes it quite clear. It goes there at the invitation of the Congolese government to go and protect the Congolese government and root out militia groups, the M23 included in that. So this is not a peacekeeping mission. Peacekeeping mission is that of the United Nations. This one, it's a bilateral mission between the Congo and some SADC countries. Was it a legal mission? It is a legal mission. It's within the instrument of the SADC that an attack on one member state is an attack of all of them. It is within international law because Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, I think Article 51, makes it quite clear that countries have the right to do collective security. So we must destroy we must come up with a distinction between a peacekeeping mission and this military intervention. This is a military intervention working with the Congolese Defense Force in dealing with this issue. So that's what it is. So I think really coming up with different things, and sometimes you find the wording that this is a peacekeeping mission, it's really misleading. And you would find even in the SADC statement, they make it quite clear that their mission is to protect the territorial integrity of the DRC. So a peacekeeping mission has no function. The peacekeeping mission is to separate warring faction and ensure that there's no fight between warring faction. That's a function of peacekeeping mission. But the UN mission, which is there, Naledi, it's operating under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which has some level of peace enforcement, and there's some lethal power that comes with that.
Yeah, you know, I think we're going to come back to this issue a little bit later on as we start to throw forward to the State of the Nation address that will be delivered on Thursday, Dr. Makhubela. So a little bit later on, we'll talk about what the president needs to say, what notes he needs to hit to deal with this matter as it unfolds in Goma. But I want to look at some local news as well, Professor Breakfast, if you'll assist me with this, because my goodness, social media this week also ablaze as we watch the images of the daughter of former president appearing in court, and then the former president taking the podium afterwards. And I actually want to read out a little bit of what he said. He's quoted as saying, "If we don't protest one day, they'll arrest you for doing nothing. They're going to say, enter here in jail because you said, I see you." What's wrong with the phrase? She didn't even say, "I see you, black man." That's the former president speaking after his daughter appeared in court on these incitement charges. What do you make of this particular moment there that we watched? And also reflections on what is actually being looked at from that from that era of our lives that cost us 350 lives?
Lady, I don't want to play the card before the horse. Suffice to say, thank goodness in this country, in my opinion, it appears as if we do have the rule of law. My definition of rule of law is Section 9 of the Constitution, meaning that everyone is equal before the law, in theory. So if someone is accused of inciting violence, regardless of the status of that person has to account. There were a number of events in the build-up to those activities that occurred. As you said, I mean, our economy was dealt with the blow in a big way on a large scale. And people need to account for what had happened, because what had happened, and I'm not saying that this person that we're talking about is guilty, but I'm just saying that the due process must be allowed, and let's see how it goes.
Okay, a clean sweep there. If we look at the MK party, I mean, you can't deny that one thing the MK party knows how to do is to keep the country talking. Also this week, another issue that was seen in the courts was on Friday, the Johannesburg High Court dismissing with costs their application for them to see the public broadcaster no longer using the term the Government of National Unity. That dismissed in the courts. I mean, was that ever going to be a successful debate?
Naledi, my view is that our understanding about political realities is as a result of what is reported to us by the media. The media does not only report about stories, but the media frames discourses. And the rationale behind that is to influence the thinking of the public. So the relationship between the media and citizens is a relationship of power. Now, I think political parties are within their right to contest the space, but it's the manner in which MK has laid the grievance that makes me to raise eyebrows. There are certain steps, in my view, that they have skipped. They instituted a legal action without exhausting the complaint with other forums. There are many forums that they could have approached and exhaust those channels, then institute a legal action if things did not go according to plan for them. But for them to go straight to a court of law, it begs a number of questions, in my opinion, in terms of what is the motivation behind this legal action that they have instituted.
Okay. As we continue with issues around the Government of National Unity, the President this week on Thursday said to deliver the State of the Nation address. Obviously issues around the Bella Act implementation, Expropriation Act implementation, NHI implementation. No surprises that those are going to be important features of that SONA this week, Professor Breakfast. But the parliamentary coordinator for COSATU saying that the president should not be accommodating this or that party in his speech, parties of the GNU, but make sure that he focuses on economic growth and job creation. But I'm wondering if there is a way that he is able to strike that balance, or is that not necessarily a priority for the president anymore, since he's gone ahead and signed some of this legislation in?
Yeah, my view is that the president has sort of like set the scene in terms of what he's going to talk about. For instance, normally, and I know this is a very controversial subject, but normally the January the 8th statement, though it is a statement of the ANC, but it tends to be a feeder system to the program of action of government.
Right.
And the Lekgotla that took place also frames the discussions in terms of what fits into the State of the Nation address. But on the whole, or by and large, I think the speech of the president will be twofold. On the one hand, it will focus on domestic issues, namely, the security threats, which are posing a major danger to the democracy that we have: inequality, poverty, unemployment, underdevelopment, gender-based violence, crime, the slow pace of the economy. On a global scale, we have a lot that is happening. Human rights abuses, the ceasefire that was struck by Hamas and Israel, the conflict is underway in the DRC, the change of administration in the US, issues of multilateralism, you know. So those are the sorts of things that is going to focus on, in my view, in terms of setting the agenda for the country for the whole year, in terms of what lies ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Makhubela, let's, I suppose, put you in the shoes of the president here, and as the country, in fact, the world watches on as the violence escalates in Goma in the DRC. What's the right thing for him to say on Thursday?
Well, it's to give assurance about the peaceful resolution of the conflict in the DRC. And he needs really to emphasize that South Africa will do whatever it can to persuade President Tshisekedi to change his posture in terms of negotiation with M23 and negotiation with Rwanda. That's one fundamental thing. And because now the M23 are advancing towards Bukavu in South Kivu, so he must give assurance. But there must also be assurance about when are we receiving the mortal remain of our soldiers. And I think the president must start to set the tone to guide and channel the anger, because once the body bags start arriving in the country, that's when it will dawn on us that we've lost some of our best in the battlefield. And that anger must be channeled so that this anger is not going out of control. So there's a need to channel the anger, the general public anger, and rightfully so. Yeah. People have the right to be angry, but that anger must be channeled.
Well, let's chat again after that State of the Nation address, gentlemen. An absolute pleasure having you with us on the show. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela is a former diplomat and international relations expert, and Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast, political analyst, speaking to us this evening on Newsfeed PM, the late edition. Let's take a short break. When we come back, more news.